Oh, thank you, Michael. And yes, we have Karina, Honor, and Yvonne here. Welcome to the show, girls.
Thank you, Marty. Great to be here. Thank you.
Great here. And we have our panel. We have Dr. Jensen and we have Leo Quinlan. Hello, guys.
Hello, everybody.
Hello, Marty. Hello, everybody.
Now, can we just start off before we go to the Women of Honor? Can we just start off, Leo? Give us a little bit on moral injury, please, for our listeners.
Okay, I think it's kind of important to put it in a layman's perspective, and I can be corrected by and amended by Wally in a moment. I first heard about moral injury from Wally and others in the United States in January of 2021. That was the time when the Jadaville review was being carried out, and I brought up moral injury with it, but that's a separate issue altogether. But moral injury was very clearly defined by Wally and others, and putting it simply, and it's in a military context, but we know that it goes into other fields of endeavor as well. Military context in relation to Jadaville anyway. When soldiers undergo some traumatic experience and are then betrayed by higher authority, this is Jadaville. That's what happened. And then, as Wally and others have pointed out, the results of moral injury on the individual and on their families, etc., but particularly individual, is first of all silence. They don't talk about it. They don't talk about it. And that was my father, and that was other veterans that I served with. I didn't even know they were in Jadaville, and they're on the same Ranger course as me. When I commanded a company of Rangers in Athlone as a commandant, I retired early because of first year drums. Some of the men that I served with, they were already out of the army, and I was out of the army before I realized they were in Jadaville. They never told me. Very strange. Anyway, then the additional effects of moral injury on the individual is, let's say, depression, broken relationships, not able to hold down a job, mental illness, and two of the Jadaville fellows, from what I've heard, ended up in mental homes. Then, unfortunately, suicide, and we know 5 that we can pinpoint from Jadaville that were suicide, and a recent number I got was 10, closer to 10, and that was from a Jadaville officer who's still alive in County Mayo. So that's the kind of thing. And then, since I delved a bit deeper into this and I started talking to veterans in the last year, and they say, yeah, that's me. I never spoke about it. Yeah, the daughter said, my father coming back from Jadaville, he could never tell me he ever loved me after that. We knew there was something, but he just couldn't talk about it. A Jadaville veteran himself, who absolutely adores his wife and still adores her. And he said, I could never use the word love after I came back from Jadaville. Could never use the word love. And I meet this man 6-8 times a year. And he and his wife are only an example to us all. So anyway, it goes down through the generations. And again, this is something Wally and his friends have identified. The 2 things about the Jadaville is the collective moral injury. They're a perfect example of collective moral injury, and transgenerational. It goes down through generations, because I know children and grandchildren of Jadaville veterans, and I meet them regularly, and they are suffering. There are brothers and sisters not talking to each other because of what they suffered as a result of their father coming back from Jadaville, etc., etc. So that's a kind of a layman's way of putting it and what I've learned in the last year. So I'm sure Wally can, who's much more versed in this because he wrote the book on it, he'll be able to correct me or elaborate a bit better.
Well, it's not just Jaredville, as we're saying. It's moral injury goes down, ripple effect. And I think, Wally, could you just tell us the story which I like about after Vietnam that would I think most people would relate to it, about the first time you told your wife?
Yes. And Leo, you did a great job as always. Thank you for that great description of moral injury. There's some things about moral injury that I think are important to sort of keep in mind. And the silence is part of that. And shame is a pretty loaded term, but shame is, I think, in this context, really important to sort of keep in the forefront of your thinking about it, because there is a sense of shame that doesn't come from oneself. It comes from the reaction and the responses of others from outside. And so when I came home from Vietnam, I came back in March of 1969. Rita and I got married in December of 1969. So we're coming up on 53 years together. It only took me 40 years before I could talk to her about my experience in Vietnam. And it happened when I was writing the book on moral injury. And we were on a vacation in Florida, and I got up early one morning and was out sitting on the balcony overlooking a beautiful golf course and enjoying the Florida weather in January. And I was out having a cup of coffee and started writing. And I had one of those moments where everything just sort of seemed to flow together. And I wrote for a little over an hour and a half, 2 hours, and I finished a chapter. And so about that time, Rita came out, and I said, she's a very good editor. She's very talented with that, and she's my most trusted advisor. So I said to her, would you mind reading this chapter and letting me know what you think of it? And so she said, well, yeah, sure. So I printed it out and handed it to her. And she said, I'm going to go inside and have some breakfast, and I'll read this, and then I'll come back and let you know what I think. So she did. And about 10 minutes after she left, I said to myself, I shouldn't have given it to her. This is not a good thing. Everything's going to change here, not for the better. And after 30 minutes, she still hadn't come back. And I'm thinking, oh, I know I shouldn't have said anything to her. This is bad. And about an hour and 15 minutes later, she came out and tears coming down her cheeks. And she said to me, why didn't you tell me this before? And I said, I couldn't. I didn't want you to think of me that way. And she said, do you think I didn't know? And I kind of looked at her and she said, I sleep with you. I wake you up when you're having your bad dreams. Did you really think I didn't know? And it was the most healing moment I think I've ever had in my life, that the person that I trusted the most, but also trusted the least in some ways, with being able to tell her of my experiences in combat, just opened up for me the entire possibility of getting my voice back. And so since then, I have come to understand that one of the things that we can do for each other is to lend each other our ears so that they can have their voices back and be able to talk about these things in a safe and sacred space without fear of judgment, without fear of that sort of voyeuristic tendency that people have when they see a bad automobile crash. They want to slow down, stop and look, but they don't want to get involved. They just want to. And so that's what I believe strongly about what we're doing in terms of addressing moral injuries that are not only transgenerational, they're trans-profession, they're trans-Atlantic, trans-Pacific. It's almost a universal experience that people have with this kind of a trauma, but it's not a medical condition. Unlike post-traumatic stress or a medical condition like traumatic brain injury, it's not that. It is a deeply spiritual, religious, not denominational or faith-based, but it's a religious experience that people have of having been betrayed by a person in a legitimate position of authority who takes away our sense of being safe and secure. And what that does is, with the shame, all of us who are good people do bad things on occasion. we say things we really shouldn't have said and probably didn't really mean to say, or we do things that we know we shouldn't have done and probably wouldn't do again. But we feel that our moral code has been transgressed. We've done something that we know internally goes against our value system. And moral injury causes us to change our thinking from being a good person who has done something wrong, something bad, but can be forgiven for it, can atone for it, can be reconciled in spite of it. We begin to see ourselves not as good people who have done something wrong, but as bad people who have done something bad, which is how we think of ourselves. So it has a really negative impact on our self-image and our self-understanding. So that would be what I would add to what Leo very eloquently said about moral injury.
Thank you so much for that, Wally. And we'll go into Irish Women of Honour, and we'd like to start. What is Irish Women of Honour for our listeners? Could I ask you, Honour?
Yeah. Thanks for having us on, Marty. I suppose.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
We are a group of women who served in the Defence Forces, the Army, Navy, and the Air Corps, and we all had different bad experiences, very hard experiences, some very traumatic experiences, and we just came together. Some of us knew each other, others didn't. We fell upon each other a little bit, but we came together. We started meeting to support each other, to talk about our experiences and what happened to us. And then we decided maybe we should do something for the younger generation coming in, for the people who are still in there, because most of us had retired at this stage, for the people still in there, and see if we could, bring it forward, do something to make like meaningful change. And that's what we're all about. We're all about meaningful change in the Defence Forces. And Katie Hannon did our documentary last year.
Yes.
And it gave us our voices, and it went bigger, I think, than any of us expected it would be. And it got a huge response, and we feel and we hope, and people have told us that the serving members feel they have a voice.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what we're about and how we've come about and where we are right now. I'm sure we'll talk more about what we've done in the years since the documentary, but that's where we are now. So
thank you. And Karina, could you tell us your story, please? Not that we'll come back to you, Honour. That was just an introductory part.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay. Well, I was one of the first 38 females to join the Irish Defence Forces, one of the pioneer women in 1981. And I stayed and put up with the misogyny and the systemic abuse and the microaggressions for 30 years and 248 days of my service. But during that, there were good times as well. I mean, I went through the ranks, became the first female senior NCO in the Irish Defence Forces. And I travelled overseas 11 times, 6 to Lebanon, 3 to Bosnia, 1 to Chad, and 1 to Eritrea. And it was mainly during the overseas service that I encountered a lot of abuse and harassment. And on 2 occasions, the abuse and the harassment ended up in 2 attempted rapes.
Whoa.
And the main thing about, one of them was in my second trip overseas in 1990. But the thing that I would like to emphasize is in 1990, my first attempted rape, but then, nothing changed, even though I reported it, and the man, the officer didn't even get a slap on the hand. He just laughed it off. Everything was, I was just told, get on the plane and forget about it. 12 years later, within the Defence Forces, there was all these reports and reviews and, everything's hunky-dory now, everything's fine. But 12 years afterwards, another attempted rape. so what we're trying to bring forward to the public and to the hierarchy of the defence forces, that nothing has changed within the 40 years since women have joined. So we're all about our our 4As: the action, the accountability, the apology, and the acknowledgement.
Yes.
And we're just trying to push now to get the action and accountability hasn't come forward yet. They're doing all these wonderful things, but nothing is changing.
You're not getting any closure, are you?
Not getting any closure. That's a good word. Yeah, we're not getting any closure. I mean, I could go into in depth of the horrific attempted rapes, but there's no need to do that, because one, I don't think the listeners need to know any of the great details, but they just need to know that this is still happening. This is the unfortunate thing, and it's not just happening in the Irish Army. It's happening all over the world, and all of the armies all over the world. But naturally enough, we're concentrating on trying to protect the next boy and girl that comes through the gates in our defence forces.
Yes, yeah.
And after putting up with it for almost 31 years, I would have thought that there would have been significant changes throughout that time, but unfortunately not.
And Yvonne, can we bring you in there, please?
Yes. Yeah. So, I mean, I think what Leo and what, if you don't mind me calling you, Wally, are talking about
Wally, yeah.
now really speaks completely to our hearts. Like, I mean, I would have looked up moral injury, and it would have said about, crushing your soul. And I mean, it was always like, obviously I went through a sexual abuse experience, and I was left on the floor, kind of stuck to the floor. And as Karina says, we don't need to go into it. It's part of our documentary. But there was the humiliation, there was the shame, there was the fear. And this all equals the silence that Wally and Leo are speaking about here tonight. So it is you being silent, afraid to speak out, afraid to speak truth to power. And we are here now trying to empower the young girls and men coming through that system that might experience something that we're not just talking about sexual abuse, we're talking about bullying, we're talking about discrimination, we're talking about victimization, we're talking about isolation, exclusion, and there's another concept called mobbing. This is when you actually raise your voice and you actually say something has happened. I mean, in '96, I was one of the first female air traffic controllers. All the males up to that point got promoted to captain as soon as they received that rating. I didn't get that promotion. I never complained. In '97, sexually abused. I never complained. In 2005, I would have been sick, very sick. I actually did suffer, and I was looking up moral injury. So I did suffer depression. I did try and commit suicide. I was very, very low, very bleak. I was a shell. I went into the army at 17, full of viber, full of vigor, full of, like, I was so ambitious to strive to be the best I could be in there. And I was a shell of my shell. I was bulimic. I was getting sick up to 8 times a day on one occasion, buying 3 bag loads of food so I could puke them into the toilet. So this moral injury is a new concept to me, but it's one that I applaud and one that I would love to do more work on, because my soul was destroyed, and not just my soul. I'm speaking to people in there at the moment. I made a protective disclosure, as did Karina, as did other people we know in there. And we're not being listened to. My protective disclosure was initiated on the 26th of January, 2017, saying about the abuse, saying about the intimidation, saying about the victimization, saying about the bullying. And it's only since Women of Honour that they've actually breached us, and they've said, now, do you want to talk about it? But this is years later. This is 2017 when that was initiated. We're talking years later, and only because of Katie Hannon and these brilliant, brave women here today, that now they're actually going, okay, now you can speak. We want to give the voice to the voiceless. That's why we're here. It's not about compensation. They offered me 100,000 at one stage to settle a case on discrimination. I said, no, thank you, because all I wanted was one piece of paper that stated I was discriminated against. I got these weak appraisals when I had 2 kids, and I never got a weak appraisal in my life, and that was gender discrimination. And I had to actually call them out on that. That was the first time I actually complained. But when I did, it was like a nail in the coffin, because I was kind of signing away. I obviously ended up then being medically discharged in the end, because I went through from 2013 to 2020 when it finally concluded. I was just a mess. I was an absolute mess trying to fight this, and I was fighting it on my own at the time. I didn't realize that there was other people. That's what happens. You get isolated and you don't realize other people are going through what you're going through, and you think you are on your own, and it really does wear you down. And as I said, I at one stage I did try to commit suicide. You know, so it gets that bad. So just thank you so much for introducing us tonight, Marty, and to have these fantastic people, Leo and Wally, to educate me on this matter as well. So thank you.
Yvonne, can I just say, and thank you for your really honesty, and I think that's what it's about. And that must have, for all of you girls, that must have affected your families, as in your parents. You were very young girls at the time, and obviously you loved the army. You loved your job. That's what you wanted to do. Anna, would you like to answer on that one, please?
Actually, speaking of the silence that Wally spoke about, they hadn't a clue of anything that was going on for me. When I joined first, I found it very hard. We weren't welcomed. Females were not welcome. My first ship, we were not welcome. And they didn't know. I wouldn't tell them. I pretended everything was fine. So I kept my silence for a long, long time. And that's how. So it didn't affect my parents and family, but I suppose then in 2017, when I was passed over for promotion, it affected my children's, like my ability to just get on with my day at home and to mind my children. They were very young, and to just kind of get through the day and to not think about this all the time, to be able to get through the day if I haven't slept. The worry, and again, the isolation you felt at work was very hard, and you'd no one to talk to or no one to turn to.
Leo, can I just bring you in after listening to the girls?
Yeah.
And you were an officer. What do you think about what the girls are saying there from your point, from an army point of view?
Yeah. It was interesting, Karina, you said you were one of the first coming in. I remember when the first women came into the army, and I thought it was one of the better moves the army ever made. And I complimented Bobby Molloy, the minister at the time, for doing it. In fact, I complimented his wife 2 or 3 weeks ago on the same thing. I meet her regularly. I live in Galway. And I was based in Athlone Barracks. And when the women came in, I thought they lifted the place. I say that because, first of all, they were all very dedicated. It's a tragedy the way you're talking about it. Of course, I believe everything you're saying. It's a tragedy the way you were treated. Because when they came into the barracks in Athlone, I found the men started behaving better. You didn't hear so much bad language. The men started, initially, I saw them that they were dressing a little bit better. They were a bit more careful in everything they did. As well as that, I was working with some of the women. It's a terrible thing. I call the women ladies in the high by showing esteem. So if I slip into the word lady instead of girls, please forgive me. I can't
That's
think of you. Well, I should think of you as girls. I should think of you as girls because I'm older than your fathers, right?
You can call me girl anytime. It's okay.
I know. But anyway, you know where I'm coming from.
Yeah.
Anyway, the thing is, they were fantastic. The women that came in first, they were really, really fantastic. And I admired them big time. And I left the army in 1987 because burst eardrums, no more overseas service, etc. So I was age 42 then. And I never heard anything bad about the women in the army at that time. I never heard anything of what you were talking about. I mean, I heard of some, let's say, affairs that were going on, but they married, some of them married each other later and so on, but that's a different issue, and there was nothing bad. But you say about not being welcomed into the army, I never sensed that. And I was an officer, I never sensed it, maybe because of the silence factor. You didn't, if it was happening in a bike, I didn't know about it. Yeah. So, and I can fully understand what you're saying. But just I'd like to say that, unless I forget it later, Marty mentioned the word closure. And Karina, you jumped on that and you said it was a great word, and it is. And it's been my experience in the last year talking to Jadaville veterans who only opened up about it when the film about Jadaville came out. Or I've given to date 79 talks around the world on Jadaville. And when I'm asked to give a talk somewhere, there's always a Jadaville veteran or a children of Jadaville veteran turning up at the talk, and then they open up. And the silence is generally broken near the end of life, or something traumatic happens, like an illness or the film or something. And one thing I've noticed is talking to the veterans and their children, the very fact of talking about it, understanding it better, understanding why the father didn't talk, understanding why they never knew anything about it. I mean, there's a guy living in Limerick, in Abbeyfield, County Limerick, who was recommended for a military medal for gallantry and a DSM. And I know what he was recommended for in my father's notes and his everything. I know exactly what this corporal, 18 years of age, did at the time. And when his daughter was asking him, "What did you do in the army, Daddy?" She said, I peeled potatoes. That's all he would ever say, peeled potatoes. It's only when the film of Jadaville came out 50 years after Jadaville that she realized what a man her father was. But she's now got closure. And the Jadaville veterans are getting closure because they better understand why they've been silent, why I couldn't say this. And the children and grandchildren are why. Now they're understanding it. Sorry, Marty, I'm going on a bit, but you opened up my mind when you mentioned the word closure.
No, that's all right. That's why I said at the start we had extra time. But just to go back to Yvonne for a second, I understand what you're saying there, and we did have an episode on suicide because that's very close to my heart because my mom committed suicide. She attempted it 4 times and tried to take us with her, but thank God that was a look of the Irish. As I always say, she was a great singer and a great cook, but she was hopeless at that. But she got there in the end. But thank you for speaking out about that. Now, Karina, can I bring you back in there, please, and ask you a question about you're saying there like closure, as we just spoke about, but how did you go with are you still dealing with it, in other words? Forget the closure, mentally wise. Have you accepted it? Is it making you stronger? That's where I'm trying to say.
Stronger. It's making me, as when I was writing, as Yvonne stated, we both put in protective disclosures. I put mine in 2020, in May 2020, and as Yvonne, because I spoke to Yvonne about it beforehand, and she said, yeah, put it in, but don't expect anything. But unlike Yvonne, I was within 3 months of my protective disclosure, because of who I named in my protective disclosure, and that's the only reason. I was invited in for an interview by the Department of Defense, but as my partner said, I brought him with me. He said the only reason they want you in, they don't really care about you. Like, I mean, I did what I didn't want to do. I broke down and cried during that interview, trying to explain, and this is where I came up with the acknowledgement and the apology. First of all, I said, I want someone to listen to me. People are not listening. I reported every incident of rape and harassment, the assault in the pool, everything. Every time I reported it, there was always intimidation, coercion. Okay, well, if you drop it, we won't charge your boyfriend, as on the documentary. Or look, you're going home now. Your overseas report hasn't been written yet. Let's forget about it, and get on that plane. But the sort of as you say, closure, bringing back to the word closure, the bit of closure that I did get, having put in my protective disclosure, was I got a fantastic letter from the present chief of staff, he's now just recently retired. Wally retired last year, just after the documentary. He got out by the skin of his teeth. And the sentence that I want to say is that, and I have it here in front of me in the notice board. It says, your detailed correspondence, because I gave him a copy of my protective disclosure. He said, your detailed correspondence outlines serious matters that point to significant failings within the organization during your service. So for me, that was finally an acknowledgement. And and someone realizing that and admitting and putting their hand up to, yes, the Defence Forces, yes, sorry, even with all our white papers for every 10 years they did a white paper and we've got everything sorted now, that they finally realized, well, no, they haven't, and they finally has acknowledged and admitted that. So that gave me some closure, and the fact then that I was brought into the hood, into the group of the Women of Honor, is also still giving me closure. But as I'm regurgitating everything for another thing that I'm doing, it still brings up hurt, and I still haven't let go yet. I'm finding it very difficult because the army still, as far as I'm concerned, just their action and accountability just hasn't been brought forward yet. They're just still not doing enough, as far as I'm concerned.
That kind of goes back to Yvonne there, when Yvonne said earlier, Karina just said about getting an apology letter. It was a bit, certainly not closure, but when you said,
Yes.
Yvonne, is you refuse 100,000 and all you really wanted was a piece of paper to say, we acknowledge it and we'll do something for the younger soldiers or whatever army or department they go into.
Absolutely, Marty, and that's what we're saying here tonight. Like, there is a redress system. So, you know, obviously the PhD was conducted in the late 90s, and some of the journalists in Ireland got wind of it in 2000, and it broke in the paper in relation to like Tom Clonan did it in relation to the situation with women in the Defence Forces. He had interviewed them, and various things fell out from that. But then after that, we had the Eileen Dial report came out in 2002. And in that report, at the time, actually 40.8% pointed to gender discrimination being an issue. And then we have me in 2020, and the Mr. Bonlander at the time, the adjudicators from the WRC, saying it beggars belief that they haven't looked at discrimination and looked at this, and he actually, one of the fallouts from the determination, which thank God we got in the end, was that they had to conduct a review in relation to anti-discriminatory laws by December 2021. Now we have politicians going in asking them for this review, and I have yet to see or get wind of where that review is. And they're meant to train up people in discrimination laws and everything by December 2022. Now, I have heard that there is some people in the gym going and doing courses. So that obviously is being done. But I would love to, even as the individual who, you know, got that outcome through the grace of God, because actually, Wally, I'm actually a chaplain as well. I believe you're a chaplain too. So I loved the way you said we should have ears to listen and all that. So I loved all that. But I would have been very prayerful, and I genuinely believe I wouldn't have sustained the 7 years to get it to the WRC. And there's no way, like, money wouldn't come into the equation when you love God, because you love God or money. So it's God I would choose every day. And that's why you could refuse that, but at least we got the determination and a review having to be done and training having to be done, and that is what needs to be done. And this redress system at the moment that I use, that took 7 years to come to a conclusion internally, it found, the military investigating officer found in my case, receiving a week appraisal when I only did 53 days out of a 365 year, because I took all my maternity leave, all my unpaid maternity leave, all my parental leave, all annual leave. So I only did 53 days in 2010, and to get a week appraisal and only received that in 2012. So 2 years thereafter, received it late, had my second child in 2011. So I got the two appraisals, my 2010 and 2011 appraisal in 2012. And the two of them, first time in my life, stated that I was weak. And I was there thinking, I'm after having two sons. I felt I was the strongest in my life. This is someone who was suicidal and now has brought life into the world through the grace of God. And I was so happy. And that was the first time I said, I cannot. You are discriminating against me. But internally, military investigating officer, GOC, chief of staff, ombudsman, up to the minister in November 2020, stating no discrimination. And just because I happened to take a case to the WRC, it was ironic. So November 2020, we have the minister concluding there is no discrimination. And the other case, the WRC case, concluded in December 2020. And it said there was very much discrimination and you have to do X, Y, and Z because of it. And then thereafter, the minister came back and accepted that ruling. But we have a redress system in there at the moment that needs to be looked at, that needs to be addressed, and that's why we're here tonight as well. You know, that we are actually hoping that this is something else that will fall out from what we're doing. You know, thanks, Marty.
You're a very powerful force, and I think even people listening to this, they're going to learn something from you, girls. I won't call you ladies. I call you girls, Cleo. Honor, sorry, Wally, can we
Marty,
just
Marty,
just
yeah,
to see
can
what
I?
you think and what the girls are talking about?
Yeah. I first have to make a statement here. I'm the husband of a very strong woman and the father of 2 strong daughters, and they have educated me. So when I look at the screen and see you, I don't see girls, I see women. And that's not to absolve myself of any misogynism. That's just good training on the part of 3 strong women who have kind of reined me up short on a number of occasions. So having said that, one of the other the important thing that I want to make here is that when I was a young soldier, 19, 20 years old in the Army, and then on into the Navy, as a chaplain, and thinking about my own experiences, one of the things that we talk a lot about in the militaries, and I think this is a universal conversation in all militaries because it's essential to the effectiveness of a unit being able to accomplish a mission, and that is we take away the sense of I and we talk about we. And it is constantly stressed that we are a unit, we are a platoon, we are ship's company, we are a flight. We use the language of we all the time. And in reality, our individual lives depend upon we. You have to be able to count on me. I have to be able to count on you in critical situations that are matters of life and death. Given all of that, the sense of betrayal that comes when somebody who is your battle buddy, somebody who is there to have your back, somebody is there who will crawl out of a safe space to rescue you, to bring you back. When those people violate that sacred level of trust, I wonder if you 3 women can say something about what that feels like, the anger that it generates, the shame it causes, and the self-doubt that arises because you undoubtedly have asked yourself, what did I do wrong to make this happen? I wonder if you'd be willing to comment a little bit on that.
Go ahead, girls, whichever one likes to jump in there.
I'll go first. Yeah, it's so isolating, and the self-doubt, like am I doing the right thing? Should I, are they right? And then it's like they keep going until you're ready, you're definitely ready to give up. And then you don't give up because someone who you do trust and who loves you keeps pushing you to keep going. Yeah. And you do. And that's how I was until I met the Women of Honor, and they're the ones that now always push me to keep going. But the isolation, the self-doubt, it's so hard. You really feel like you're the only person in the world. It's so lonely. It's the loneliest place.
Yeah. I might go ahead, Karina. Go ahead, Karina.
This lovely phrase that the Army has, I'm sure every Army has. Oh, sure, it's only banter. Sure, it's only banter. Yeah. So don't be getting your knickers in a twist.
Yeah.
And grow a thicker skin, and you keep feeling, well, am I being too sensitive? Or did he really say that? Or was that? Did he really do that? And you're constantly and you're just in shock. Like several of my assaults, and I never thought I'd be the person that would just freeze. I just froze because one, he's this is my boss. This is an officer, supposed to be a fucking officer and a gentleman.
Yeah.
And they're doing this. And on one occasion, this officer and gentleman who I had reported another officer and gentleman several years before that, he apologized for not protecting me at this particular function. He brought me aside and said, "I'm really sorry, I didn't protect you. It was my job to protect you." And he said I was naive, I wasn't experienced enough. He was a more stronger officer, and I said, "Well, thanks very much." Again, the acknowledgement was given, the apology was given, and I felt, oh wow, great, this someone's finally listening. And then he goes and tries and forces me to kiss him. Like, I mean, so everything just fell apart again. Again, your trust is lost, your ability to you know, I don't know, to step into that situation again, make yourself vulnerable, be stupid enough to, okay, this isn't going to happen again. I'll go into the room with him. He obviously, you know, just wants to talk. And you just feel so stupid. You feel naive. You feel and you are so angry with yourself. When I ran away and I walked home that night in tears, and I berated myself for being so stupid and so innocent and so naive to think that things haven't changed, you know.
So you blamed yourself. It was your fault.
Blamed myself. It was my fault. And when the documentary came out, one remark that was made on social media said, "Well, why the hell did she open the door? Well, what the hell was she doing opening the door?" I was in an overseas situation. You have to open the door because you just don't know what's going on. Like, it could be a fire, there could be anything, there could be an alert. Like, you open that door, especially if someone's banging on that door and making a racket.
Yeah.
You open the door. But I was bereft and criticized. What a stupid idiot. Why did she go and open the door? She got everything she deserved for it because she opened the door.
Well, it's obviously the woman's fault, wasn't it?
Yeah, of course, always the woman's fault.
Yeah.
You know. But the other thing that I've remembered is that this year the Department of Defense commissioned a report on a commission of the Defense Forces, and this came out earlier this year in 2022, right? So the first female cadets came into the army in 1980. So we're now at 2022, and the one statement that jumped out at me in the newspapers, like from that commission, and one of the members of the board of the commission said that in 2022, the working environment for a woman is still hostile, extremely hostile in the Irish Defence Force. Like, to me, that's tragic, very tragic. It's still being said 42 years later.
It's really destructive too of the ability of any unit to carry out its mission, isn't it? Because you can't trust the person up next to you.
Yeah.
Yvonne.
Yeah, and Wally, that's a powerful word there. The whole concept of trust, and like, you know, the women laugh at me sometimes. I'd love to do a PhD or something, but wouldn't it be a great one? Why do you lose trust in an organization? Why does the organization, you know, if you could get to the bones of that, that would be something to do, and that's something that, you know, I'd love to do. But in relation to when I did make the complaint in 2013, a female officer did come up to me and said to me that she was told not to be seen with me if she wanted to further her career in the Air Corps. That was heartbreaking to hear. And when I used to go down to the mess, I would sit down, and there was one individual, you know, there was, I'd say now, Leo, you'd know this concept. In the mess, there'd be different areas for different, like, junior officers would sit in one area, senior officers would sit in another area. So you were when you went down as a woman, there wasn't very many female officers there. So you were I was always kind of trying to judge where to fit in. And I love that thing that Wally said about the bad people who have done something bad. At the time I had reported this, it wasn't something bad to do, but obviously that moral injury had seeped into me, and I was perceiving myself as, you know, I was so insecure even going down to the mess. And then I would walk in, I would sit down, and I would count to 8 seconds, and people would leave my table, and I would be left on my own. And that again, it was just soul destroying. And it was you actually saying you discriminated against me because it was, at the time, it was my CEO who had given me the weak appraisals, and because the top man had concurred with that weak appraisal, I was now pointing my finger at the top man, and that had trickled down to whoever. And when I asked this individual who said who told me not to be seen with me, I asked her, could you tell me who said that? It was a commandant that said it to her. I had never spoken to that commandant. I had never had tea with him. I had never had a dialogue with him. He did not know me from Adam. And still he was advising this junior captain not to be seen with me. So I couldn't help but put two and two together. And when I sat down, I was wondering thereafter, oh, now I know why Billy, Jack and Joe left the table. They were junior officers as well. And now it's like, so it wasn't me, it was what I had done.
Yeah.
And it was the betrayal. It was the betrayal that it had seeped out to all of these other ranks. Do not be seen with that girl if you want to go places in here, which was heartbreaking.
Can I jump in on something here, Marty?
Absolutely.
You know the old thing in the Irish history, the informer, and the informer, and then the whistleblower, and your whistleblowers, and rightly so. I applaud everything you're doing.
Yes.
But you have this thing ingrained, not just in Ireland, but in other countries as well. The informer is always, and the whistleblower is always got at afterwards, and so on, which is a terrible, terrible tragedy. And it's not fair. It's unethical. It's probably illegal, etc., etc. But I've discovered, you know what I think everybody here understands what I've been fighting for the last few years in relation to Jadaville, etc. And this report that came out about it is rubbish. And I knew the results of it 6 weeks before they ever sat, and so on and so forth. It's just a simple thing. In your case, as in the Jadaville case, and in other armies as well, I'm quite sure, and in hospitals in England and National Health Service, because I had talks with people about that. The hierarchy do not want to admit they made mistakes. That's number one. No, we couldn't have made mistakes. No, they're all exaggerating. They don't want to admit. They think it's showing weakness. Number two, they are afraid that if they do admit mistakes, that there'll be an influx of claims for compensation that will break the bank, it'll run into millions, etc. So they can't admit anything. Consequently, and I think it was Honor that said, wear you down, and you'll give up, and so on and so forth, particularly when you're on your own. Okay, that's what they do. They have deep pockets. They can let things drag out. They'll hope that you'll go away, etc., etc., etc. But in relation to Jadaville, and now in relation to the Women of Honor, they have totally underestimated us. So I say you just keep pushing what you're doing. Social media, what we're doing now tonight is going to be a podcast. Marty and I were talking about this, and Wally and I were talking about this the other day. We are developing something here. You're about the 5th or 6th podcast, and there'll be more, covering all walks of life. And this is going to be offered later to different armies, to different educational organizations, to universities,
Police departments,
to departments, to departments of defense, to everybody and anybody, free of charge. So getting back to what Yvonne said, and what you've all said, this might help younger women and younger men coming into the defense forces and other forces, paramedics and so on and so forth. And their bosses might get a better understanding of how to protect their people, hopefully.
Brilliant.
Okay.
Yes.
Leo, the concept of delay, deny, and die. That's what, it's like that they delayed, they deny it, and eventually, it dies or we die, and it's gone. Yeah. So that was good that you brought that in. Yeah.
Yeah, well, we're not letting it die a death.
Exactly.
I'm not from Jadaville, you're not from your side. No. And let's keep pushing. Let's keep pushing.
Amen.
We can put this show, you can come on the show anytime you want, girls, and we get this word out here, like Leo said. This is going to be educational on top of it, like Dr. Jensen's doing, Wally, sorry. This is what's doing. This is what, if we can help one person, and like Yvonne said, and the same with suicide, obviously, is very part of this whole thing. If we can help one person, we've done a great job. If you can help 3 or 4 young soldiers or army, whatever, police, paramedics, we've done a good job by, as Wally said, our listening ears, and being able to talk and get your voice out there. And like Honor said, not living, you know, keeping it all suppressed, you know, because when you suppress it, obviously it's just affecting you more so and the rest of your family.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things about an abuse of power, an imbalance in an abuse of power, is that the person with the power has the ability to silence the person who doesn't have the power. And that's why the silence is so devastating to people. And the isolation, Anna, that you spoke about is so devastating to people because the power does that to you. And the only way that you can recapture your own power is by someone helping you to get your voice back so that you can stand up and speak in opposition to it. So I really kind of hang on to this idea of how important it is to help people get their voices back.
Yeah.
So true. So
Leo,
true.
could I say something to you actually?
Yes.
I want to go back. It
Yes,
was a
sir.
while ago you said about, you know, I said that we weren't welcomed in by some people, we weren't welcomed on ships, but I did mean a minority. There was so many welcoming, you know.
I accepted that. I kind of knew that
Yeah.
it would be a minority, of course.
Yeah, it really was. But unfortunately, it's the minority that sometimes can, you know, stick out more. And especially on a ship, I think if there's one bad, even 2 or 3 bad eggs on a ship,
Yeah.
Yeah.
it affects the whole crew. So, you know, like my husband was in the Navy and he didn't know anything that was going on and was flabbergasted when he heard everything from the women, you know. And you know, there's so many like that. And I do have great male friends from the Navy that I'm still in contact with, and, you know, and they didn't know what was going on, you know. So I just wanted to reiterate that. Just
No, I kind of knew that. I knew that, Honor, without you having to say it. And I heard from Marty, and I could hear it in your interviews over in the media, etc. No more than myself, you really liked the Defence Forces, the Army, the Navy, or the Air Force. You liked it. You liked the lifestyle, and you liked mostly 95% of the people you were working with. And the tragedy of it is that you're not listened to. And I had a few angry words with a couple of generals once upon a time, 4 or 5 years ago. I said, guys, and these were all younger than me. I think I'm probably the eldest. I mean, probably even older than you, Wally. So and all
I'll
these
toss the
generals,
coin.
yeah, toss the coin. They were lieutenants, the generals that are retired generals now were lieutenants when I was a company commander, as a commandant. So I was never in awe of any generals anyway. My dad was a colonel in the army and so on and so forth. So I grew up with them. And I said to them, fellas, whatever it is, the moment you get into general rank, you become politicians. And in relation to Jadaville and other issues, none of you have had the courage to put your heads above the political parapet. And that's it in a nutshell. And that was me kind of telling them what I thought of them. And you're falling into the same, not falling, I would say, not falling into, you're in the same situation as many others on pay and conditions and other things as well. They just don't want to listen for the reasons I've said earlier.
Yeah.
The political part of that, Leo, I think is really worth kind of thinking about for a moment. Organizations, institutions tend to promote people who make the organization or the institution first and foremost in their career. And once in a while, there'll be somebody who doesn't do that, who's kind of the oddball that comes on, that gets promoted as kind of a corrective, but it's insufficient. It's not enough. We need to have people of courage and honor, and who understand.
Women of honor, you mean?
Well, people, because I think we need men of honor too. There are a lot of men out there who are in positions where they could say something and don't. And so when you talk about the young officers coming up need to be tutored and mentored and schooled, I think that's really true. We need to have men and women who will stand together as part of a unit, part of a team, part of a ship's company, so that no one has to fear anything but the enemy outside. We don't need to fear each other.
Yeah, Wally, could I just come in there and with Leo as well, if you don't mind, Marty, because like
No,
when
go
you
ahead,
think
please.
when you think of the values, Marty and Leo and William and Wally, like it's all about respect, and you said it there. It's all about loyalty, moral courage, physical courage, integrity. It's all these are all the values that make up the Defence Forces. But I've done a bit of research, and in the research it was sometimes when you get to a senior rank, then your loyalty goes to the institution above the individual person. So I spoke briefly to a Baroness Nuala O'Loan, and she kind of broke the prison service in the north of Ireland, and she would say about this institutional protection. So we have people protecting the institute above the person. So the person again is crushed because maybe what they're saying is not what the organization wants to hear. And then we're back to exactly what you're promoting tonight and we're saying tonight about the whole moral injury. So the person, then their little soul is destroyed because the institution and the loyalty to that is perceived as something more important than the individual person, which is again.
Say, when I was a junior officer, we used to say that when you were promoted to commander, you had to have a lobotomy, and when you were promoted to captain, you had to have your spine removed.
There's one thing that's worth mentioning. It was mentioned before, but Senator Gerard Crockwell and various other senators and a few TDs came to Galway in the USAC in Galway. That's the Renmore Barracks in Galway, to listen to a talk I was giving on Jadaville, and they were sitting in the audience. And some of them were ex-army as well, as Gerard Crockwell was, from 2 different armies. And behind Gerard Crockwell was sitting a Jadaville veteran, Charlie Cooley, whose brother served with me in Athlone, and whose sister, Paula, was one of my sergeants in 15th Battalion in Tralee later on. Lovely, lovely people. And Senator Crockwell was introduced to Charlie Cooley that night as a veteran of Jadaville. He knew Charlie for about 40 years. And only until that night, he didn't know that he was in Jadaville. And 2 days later, in the Shannon, he stood up and he said, I was at a talk, blah, 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 the other night, and I met an old friend of mine, and it was only that night I discovered he was from Jadaville. And then it just made me think. They never spoke about it. Silence, not from shame, but from hurt. And I thought it was very telling. They were hurt by being betrayed. Hurt. Literally just hurt.
Well, my dad never spoke about.
My father suffered from that.
Yeah, your dad did, and my dad obviously the same thing. He never spoke about it. I never knew he was there till I was contacted about it, and I think now it made, and since Leo and Wally have taught me, as Yvonne was saying, I've only learned about moral injury. It's given me a great understanding. I went looking for my father. I hadn't seen him for 30 years, but he passed away before I found him. Probably lucky for him, but but it's just then what happened. We're talking about moral injury, but what happened with the ripple effect as we go back to. But my mother, so that's what I was asking you girls about, like your partners or who had you at the time. I believe my mother suffered, and she took her own life in the end, but she suffered from the letdown from my father was a ripple effect because he took it out at home on us. Would you agree with that?
Who are you asking? I agree with it.
Yeah.
Anyone that wants to jump in there, it's an open conversation.
I would certainly agree with that, Marty. And I think part of trying to deal with and for me, I'm a little bit loose with my definition of shame and hurt, because I think they're maybe 2 sides of the same coin. And I think that one of the ways that people oftentimes will deal with that sense of hurt and the frustration of feeling disempowered is they begin to self-medicate. They drink too much, they smoke too much, they eat too much. They are too silent. They're too angry, and to be able to rid yourself of that really takes someone who is able to help create this safe and sacred space where you can talk about your feelings honestly and not feel judged, not feel put down, not feel pushed back, but simply of the space of acceptance. And that's, I think, the essence of the healing process for moral injury. It's not a medical condition that you can make a diagnosis, write a prescription, and get back to me when you feel better. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah. But just very quickly, I don't know how, but what annoys me intensely since all this thing came about, the Jadaville and the moral injury and so on, is that the powers that be, everywhere from the minister to the department to the current chief and the previous chief of staff, they have all been told the story of Jadaville, and they've all been told about moral injury. And the previous chief of staff wrote back, thanks Leo for this. Now I understand a lot of what I was getting from veterans. That it was just a throwaway phrase type of thing. It didn't mean much coming from, quite frankly. But what I cannot, they're fathers. They have children and they have grandchildren, and they cannot get it into their heads what two 15-year-old boys from Athlone put up with in Jadaville 15 years ago, what 12, 16-year-olds put up with in Jadaville, and some of those were recommended for medals. And one of them, and it's no harm in me saying it because we've commissioned the family to say it, in Australia, he took his own life. An 18-year-old in Jadaville took his own life at the age of 22 years later. And this is known by the powers that be. They know them by name, they know what happened, and yet they won't do the right thing. They will not admit any wrong and will not do the right thing. And they're just constantly adding to the moral injury element that's percolating down through the generations.
I need to throw in something there that I haven't spoke about, and I have the letter. Is you're talking about Matt Quinlan in Queensland, young Matt Quinlan.
And no relation.
No relation. Lucky for him. But
I'd be proud if he was.
I know that Matt Quinlan, the family which authorized me to. So we organised to get a plaque done in Winton, a copper plaque. We got one done for Winton and Ireland, but I contacted the Minister of Defence, and the Irish Embassy were all on board, and asked them, could they recognise this Jadaville hero that's lying in Winton? Could we just get the ambassador and come and do it? And they sent me a letter back, basically more BS, was there's enough stuff going on and everything, but we wish you endeavours, Mr. O'Connor. Well, we got it done. The family paid for it. Now, I contacted the embassy when I got the present. So you look at this now, the plaque was a few $1,000s. Okay. We could have raised the money the family wanted to pay anyway, but I thought the government should pay for this for a lost soul in Winton. And then when I contacted them, then they had a presentation from me. I never was even in the army. They spent $5,000 for all my family and guests to get presented with the medals, and yet they could not spend half that on a real soldier. But I will release that. I have that document. I just wanted to put that in there as Leo was talking.
That's it. They'll fight you. They re-victimize you by fighting you for so long.
Yes.
Yeah, it's just so, and you feel like you're trying to do something good, and the family, but then they put it back with one letter, and they kind of just, it's almost, we wish you luck with your endeavors. Well, I think I'd be like you girls. I went, watch this, and we got it done. You know?
Well done, Marty.
But I think actually it's gone a little bit, the pendulum is swinging in our direction because they are worried now. They are worried with the Women of Honor, what they're doing. They're worried about what other people are doing about pay, conditions, naval ships, not lack of this, that, and the other. And they're worried about what we're doing for Jadaville. So they are feeling threatened, and rightly so. And we should keep at it.
Absolutely.
And about time as well. I mean, our documentary just opened the floodgates for the serving men and women in the Defence Forces, and it was fantastic to see. And we just didn't expect that floodgates for us to open that Pandora box for them, and especially the serving females were just words couldn't describe how thankful they were to us, but. We did it for ourselves. Well, I'm speaking for myself. I just did it for myself. I was going back to that word closure. I just said, right, I can't take this anymore. I can't keep it bottled up. I have to let it go and set it free, and then hopefully set myself free. But in no words couldn't describe as to how amazing we felt when we discovered that we'd opened the doors for other
Yeah.
females and men for their ability to find their voices. And the same with the Jadafil. I mean, yeah, watch this space, the Woman of Honor or the Jadafil. We're not going away. We're just not going away, and just going to have to come to terms with it. And we want our accountability at the end of the day.
That's right.
And yeah, we need the bigger closure.
Yes.
Yeah.
You're obviously not doing it. You girls are not doing it for yourself. I can tell that you've been through it. You're doing it for, and I think that's why your voices need to get out there. Now we're going to have to
Yeah.
close up the show soon, but I'd like everyone to have five minutes each with a closure and statement you want to get out there, and how we can contact you or help you.
Well,
Let
I
me
think I
ask a question as part of the closure that I'd make, and that is, how do you think that this conversation on moral injury and gaining some understanding of moral injury can be useful to you as you talk with other women and particularly young men of the damage that's done by some of the betrayal that takes place?
Yvonne, do you want-
I would obviously, when the damage is done, it depends on what is, whether you've been bullied, harassed, sexually harassed, victimized, isolated, whatever it is, it does lead to the humiliation, the shame, the fear. It does lead to the mortification, the guilt. There's just so many, you're devastated, you're isolated. But what I actually read something today, and I kind of think it really kind of links in with all of this. These people do become silent, and our bottom line is, oh, please, if you can speak, do speak, and speak as soon as you can, because the silence will kill you and the truth will set you free. But this is what I came across today. And I think when we did send in the protective disclosures, and okay, so they're working on them now, but it took so many years, it was the standard you walk past is the standard you accept.
Yes.
So I am saying, we've given you all what has happened. Are you walking past this now? Are you accepting it happened? And what can you do? They need to get down under the nuts and bolts of what is happening in there. They need to investigate it properly. They need to bring out the truth. They need to shine the light on the darkness so that everyone can be set free. That voices can regard all the humiliation. You're not on your own. Don't be humiliated. I was humiliated. I was sucked down, but we found our voice now. And I'd be saying to everyone, it's not your humiliation. You didn't bring this on yourself. Someone else did. So please do speak out, because you will be set free.
Don't be ashamed. Speak
Don't
out.
be ashamed, Marty. That's it exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Honor, can we have a closing statement from you?
Oh God, how do I follow that? I suppose just for the women of honor, I think we've been screaming it from the rooftops now for all of this year anyway. We need a statutory inquiry. A review isn't cutting it. It's not like they know because we've told them what's going on. Like, they need an investigation. They need to really know what is going on, and they won't get that by doing a review. They'll only get that by a statutory inquiry. And I think that's we're blue in the face from saying it, but they just by doing nothing, and it's just a stalling tactic, the review. And by
Just
doing
kicking
nothing,
the can down the road, isn't it?
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And by doing nothing, they're permitting it to continue. So
Karina,
Yes.
can we say
Um,
hello? And then
yeah.
Leo, and then Wally, please.
Yeah. Well, I think I've said enough. I'm just going to, as far as closure is concerned, I'm doing my own thing to get my own closure. I've just recently finished a book,
Yes,
and which which will be out in March. And it's just my own memoir of my own 31-year service. And it's for, as the Americans would say, just for my own closure.
You'll have to come on and talk about that when it comes out, Karina.
Yeah, I unfortunately can't even say anything about it.
I know, we spoke about that, yeah, no, I understand that.
Yeah.
And
But,
Leo.
Okay, lest I forget it, my son, one of my second youngest son, Ronnie, and my very youngest son, Connor, they're making a documentary on Jadaville, the aftermath. And moral injury has come into it, etc. And one of my sons, the second youngest, is coming with me next month to meet Wally over in Carlisle, U.S. Army War College, and he'd be interviewing people. If it's appropriate for any of the women of honor to come onto this documentary and talk about moral injury, not or in whatever context, whatever way you want to mention it, please contact me later. But anyway, you mentioned, Karina, the review that's taking place and so on. And I remember Katie Hannon saying this on the radio about the review coming up, etc., and what the terms of reference and so on, that you might not have been happy about it if I heard you correctly. The same thing was happening as it happened with the Jadaville. The terms of reference for Jadaville were useless.
Yes.
And the result was predetermined before the board ever sat. And I knew it. And it was even said to me, I knew it from 3 different people, the chairman of the board, the chief of staff, and the Department of Defense, what the outcome was going to be 6 weeks before the board ever sat. So don't expect too much from the review. Okay?
We don't.
I know.
Right.
Honor knows already.
Yeah, Honor has already said that. So then, anyway, look, you have done great up to now. And after tonight, I hope that you've got another weapon in your arsenal, i.e. moral injury. So maybe you could educate all your colleagues, all your friends, exactly what moral injury is and how it relates to your situation. And the key word here is betrayal. And then you could say, why were they betrayed? For the reasons that I said, they're covering up, they don't admit mistakes, etc., and so on. And basically use this moral injury weapon that you now have to get the result that you want and get at the people that your friends, and also get at the powers that be to do the right thing.
Thank you,
so much,
Leo.
Thanks.
Now,
Wally?
I would just say that I'm available for you if you have any questions, or if there's anything that you wonder about. You certainly feel free to contact me. Marty, maybe you can make my email address and so forth.
We all
available.
have our emails now through the Zoom.
Perfect. And for me, going through what I went through coming home from Vietnam and with my family, and moral injury is a passion for me. It's something that I do as a calling, as a sense of vocation, and it is something that I believe is universal particularly amongst those who have been in the military and in hard and difficult situations. So I'm willing and eager to do anything that I can to help further the cause. So if you think that I might be a resource for you, I'm here for that. So please accept my invitation.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Wally.
Thank you to all, and thank you to the Irish Women of Honor. Thank you, Karina, Honor, and Yvonne. And we hope to have you back on.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you, Leo.
Privilege. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Marty.
Thank you,
God
Dr.
bless
Wally.
you all. Bye-bye.
And take care, and God bless you
Bye-bye
all.
to everyone. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks,
All
Marty.
right.